make them 500% more productive within those 2 or 3 hours, like what changes? Like SaaS margins, the shapes of teams probably, but it doesn't really change like society. It doesn't really change what's possible. And so we kind of looked at all those things together, and we did this napkin math of engineers are roughly 0.6, 0.7% of the planet. So let's try and enable the other 99 point something percent. And we did start from a technology perspective. Like we were pulling our hair out. It was almost like the combustion engine had been invented, but everyone was trying to build bigger trains or something. And we were like, hang on a second, like surely this changes everything. So we started there. And we started to build these, playgrounds for people to use for different things.
Yeah.
And then the two things that emerged very, very quickly and early were, first of all, out of this 99% that weren't able to build before, there's billions of ideas and intent that has just been trapped in people that just was never we could never enable before, because people weren't software engineers. So kind of user group number one is fundamentally founders. But within founders, there's every flavor of a first-time founder building for the first time, or a technical founder who just doesn't want to scale engineering teams anymore. They're like, I've done it 2 or 3 times, and I just want the AI to do the scaffolding, and I'll focus on the value creation. Almost moving more into a more of a product kind of shape in this new relationship. But the first user group, for sure, founders. And then the second is fundamentally people who prototype, but they probably don't call themselves prototypers. And so it might be more like I'm a head of marketing, and 2 years ago, I used to sell people on a vision with a document, and now I can sell them on a vision with something tangible. And I can also ideate with AI to build something real as well. So it's these two sort of major groups of like founders and prototypers, essentially.
Great. So as a product manager myself, I'm always looking for verified customer problems. What are some compelling customer problems that are being solved with Lovable now?
Yeah, I mean, 0 to 1 startups for sure. So I'd say the most typical archetype is, there's maybe 2. So one is somebody just building a company for the first time. And with that, the sort of common trend that we're seeing is almost like the same way there's been this indie hacking community of you can build a micro SaaS up to, probably the low hundreds of thousands of ARR a month as a solo builder. We're seeing a lot of that. Was speaking to somebody last week who essentially was a growth marketer working in food and beverage. And they've built a restaurant table booking platform, but designed specifically for growth marketing for food and beverage business owners. And so, you can book your table, but also you could almost think about it like a CRM and be like, who likes to come in on Tuesdays, and therefore I should let them know when we're doing this kind of special. And you can almost think about how to nurture customer relationships over time. And that's a problem where that specific person knew the industry very well. But big SaaS would probably never have served that specific niche or had that perspective to be able to build. Right. So these kind of indie hacker style personas is like, that's super prevalent. And the other is actually often a single stakeholder in a very large organization that just wants to get things done, but the machine hasn't been able to get things done. And so another kind of easy example was chatting to the CEO of an education company in Brazil. Quite a successful company, I think a few hundred employees roughly. The CEO had this hunch that a more premium product line or a more premium version of the standard product line would do well. For years, he'd been flagging it. It would go into the roadmap. It would get prioritized, all the great things. Out of focus and distraction, it would never get done. He spent 2 weeks building this sort of premium hunch on Lovable. They shipped it on Friday. They emailed admittedly, they had an active user base, existing company. Emailed their active user base, 3 million in revenue in the first 3 days. So, yeah, it's, I guess the common thread there is like empowered stakeholder that's able to build and go end to end.
Yeah. I guess that leads into the question, like beyond experimentation and prototyping, how much can this scale? Or put another way, like, is it time to get rid of the engineers?
I wouldn't say time to get rid of the engineers, but I think where we will spend our energy as an industry will just change extremely dramatically. The same way I'm old enough, or I've been doing this for long enough that there was a time where within any given cross-functional team, you needed a database admin, right? Like every single feature uses data, and so therefore that was one person's job. And like now that would be absurd. You'd be like, hang on a second, like we have full stack product engineers that can think about schemas, and then we have platform engineers that can think about how this infrastructure scales, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just think we'll go through a huge shift. And so I think essentially anything that AI can do very deterministically will get automated. Like that should just be a very clear assumption that we should all make. And so I think we'll move from these kind of repetitive tasks around like setting up scaffolding and infrastructure and focus more on true value creation.
All right. So many of the people in the room here are probably product managers deeper in the organization. How does that empower them?
I think, I mean, similar to the sort of CEO example I gave before, I think, you know, people can run end to end on things, and they're able to ideate with way more depth than before. You know, even if only for your own personal perspective and your own personal conviction, just the ability to go way deeper than you could do with a PRD in order to figure out, you know, either what your intent is individually, or to be able to give that to customers and get real world feedback and real world signal.
Yeah. All right, so there are a lot of product managers in the room, but you've had talks in other contexts, right? So when you've been at an event, for example, with engineers, how do they react to this?
So I think what's really strange actually is every single function, so whether I go to like an AI engineering event or a product management festival or whatever, there's so much hyperbole about how headcount will change. And so I think Andrew Ng said recently that he thinks that there'll be a 2-to-1 ratio of PMs to engineers. But then I go to you know, engineering meetups and people are like, hang on a second, AI can write all this code for me now. And so actually I want to focus more on the product activities and so on and so forth. And so I think most of the bold bets on headcount will turn out to be wrong, to be honest, because everybody's kind of discussing these things in sort of functional silos. But I think what will change very dramatically, which I'm extremely high conviction on, is I think in the future, teams will be very asymmetric. And so it won't be the case that, you know, I think Spotify really popularized this cross-functional squad method of you have your PM, your EM, engineers of various flavors, designers, maybe an analyst, researcher, and so on. And then, you know, you have this almost perfect replicable team setup where you can just scale that horizontally or linearly. I think in the future, teams will be huge misshapes. And so you'll have something that might just be a 1 or 2 person team, or something that might be a 20-person team, and the individuals in that will have certain sensitivities and biases depending on the specific problem space. And so I think this sort of asymmetric nature will appear more and more over time, and we'll think less about trying to reproduce or cookie cutter teams. And I think the other factor here as well is we think a lot about, we figured out there's this kind of 80% law with AI and its capabilities, where like, I assume you're familiar with the Pareto principle of like 80-20. But what we see is that AI is basically 80% good at everything, but genuinely everything. And so what that means is that as a team, you can use AI to get 80% good enough in most things, in most disciplines. Maybe 80% is good enough. Like maybe you value time to market, and so you're fine with 80%, and that's okay. Or maybe you do want to fill that 20% gap. And you know, as we all know, that 20% gap is often the last 200 or 300 or 400%. And so I think we'll see these asymmetric teams where either with small sets of empowered people, but plus with AI that can do 80% of everything to fill in the other gaps, we'll end up with very like misshapen teams, and that'll be the future.
Okay, all right, interesting. Now, I mean, getting to this point, right? It sounds almost magical and beautiful now, but like I'm sure that there were trials and tribulations along the way, and I understand you had to kind of rebuild it several times until it clicked. Can you talk about that and how you figured out like what the right feature set was that you should double down on and then get rid of the rest?
Yeah, I mean, so the 12 months leading to the launch that completely exploded with Lovable, we deleted and rebuilt the product around 3 times, I think, in total. And essentially what I underestimated about AI actually is that there's a complete symbiotic relationship between the models themselves, their personality and how they behave, the context that you give them, and the user experience that you build for the users, for them to be able to provide their context as well. And what we couldn't do is we couldn't swap out one of these parts. We couldn't be like, a new model has been released, therefore we just swap in the new model, and that plugs into the thing we've already built, and then here we go, next model. In order to truly maximize what the models are capable of, and in order to actually inspire people to really want to use it, we had to almost delete and then re-engineer and redesign these things from the ground up each time, with each different model or different kind of product bet as well. And so there was the factor of like new models coming out every few months, and so we wanted to delete, try again, and then try and gain new perspective on how to get the most out of them. But there were also just big unknowns around the user experience that would actually resonate, and like what is it that people were truly desiring to do with AI. And the biggest factor we played with there was around latency. And so actually we probably wasted about 3 or 4 months from listening to the foundation model providers a little bit too much. So early last year, they said to us like, hey, agents are the future. Agentic AI is going to be the future. They'll be way more powerful, way more smarter, et cetera, et cetera. So we were like, great, let's build around this, let's prepare for this, and let's also play. What we didn't factor, and what neither the foundation model providers factor as well, is that latency is crucial for people's core experience. And so, if an agent is 10 times smarter, but it also takes 20 minutes rather than 10 seconds, that's a fundamentally different product.
Yeah.
And so we spent ages playing around with more capable, quote unquote, product capabilities that would take way longer. But in all those scenarios, it didn't feel like you were co-creating with AI. It felt like you were delegating to AI and throwing it over the fence, and then the AI would come back to you. And that's not what Lovable is. Like, Lovable is a real-time creation platform where you genuinely co-create with AI. And so, yeah, almost building too early for agents was probably quite a big mistake that we made, actually, if I look back in hindsight.
All right, nice. Also, when I asked around, there were comments associated with like, oh, isn't it just a ChatGPT wrapper? I mean, just to be a little bit controversial, like how would you respond to that?
I mean, I think if that was the case, then every single competitor would be as successful as ourselves. So I don't think that's the case. I think the other thing is, coming back to the point I was making earlier around, you can't just swap in the models with an existing product and go, okay, product plus model equals product plus plus. There's a lot of invisible work that happens to just, to actually make this stuff work. And so, again, coming back to this 80 kind of 20 rule, you can wrap a model and get something that's 80% okay for a lot of things. But I don't think people want something that's 80%. They want something that's 100%. And so there's that grind of, filling that gap. And so, yeah. And frankly, like, I think everything's just an abstraction, right? So a GPD wrapper is an AWS wrapper if it's running on AWS, which is a GPU wrapper if it's using a GPU, and so on. So where do you draw the line?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I've also heard you say, use AI as your co-founder. And so far we've talked about Lovable as kind of a tool that you can use to produce things really quickly and kind of quickly iterate. But a co-founder, they'll challenge you. They'll kind of stress you out. They'll push on you. How could you leverage Lovable to do that?
Yeah, so I have a slight tangent, which I'll go on and then come back to that question. So we're seeing a general trend of a move from specialists to generalists, just generally speaking. And so I think with all the good in the world, we created things like, functional career tracks where we say we're going to grow people, so we need these things. But we end up, drawing boxes around people and actually end up limiting people. Whereas my belief is that, really smart people can do lots of different things. And so when I think about founders, I think that they're the ultimate generalist, right? Nothing is no one else's job. There's no excuses. You get things done, you step on other people's toes, and so on and so forth. And so, internally at Lovable, the most successful people are generalists as well. And, we try to sort of embody this founder mentality, like across everyone, no matter your altitude or like what you're working on. And so like that's just something that we're very bullish on, and we see like a long-term trend towards that. And only 18 months ago, using the word generalist was a very dirty word, whereas now I think it's a more celebrated word, and so we think that's directionally true. But sort of keeping that in mind, this sort of generalist trend, the question was, can AI truly be a co-founder? Can it truly challenge you? AI is an amazing generalist. Like it knows sort of everything. It knows enough about everything. The way that I use it is I use it as a critic, and so I have different agents that have different instructions, different prompts for different subject matters, where I treat them as subject matter experts, and I get them to challenge me all the time. So it might be that I've come out of a design crit and I want it to challenge me on our product thinking within that did we display enough user empathy? So I'll literally give it the transcripts from my meetings. Or it knows my goals, and I'll say like, hey, I want to get better at speaking in these qualities, and I feel like I'm not getting to the point enough with this or that. And so again, like here's my like transcripts, like genuinely challenge me. And we have the same like embedded in all of our workflows. So all of the tools that we use, we have these sort of little knowledge banks or little mini agents where we can tag them in and be like, hey, tell me where I'm wrong. And so with that model, I do think of it as more of a co-founder, a confidant where I can say, like, hey, critique me. I'm going to stay in the driver's seat of myself because I am, and my goal is to improve myself. But I need your perspective as this objective AI that's just able to observe and point things out.
Yeah.